Nir, thank you so much for coming on my podcast. Thank you so much for coming on the transformation journey. And well, just before starting, I want to, for people listening, mention my friend Haritnik, who was the one who connected me to you. And so I am thankful to him for doing that. And well, yeah, I also thank you for coming today. And well, today I want to talk to you about your book, Indistractable. Um, and yeah, about many lessons that I found interesting about your journey. And yeah, stuff will be cool. And
Yeah.
so I would like to start with an introduction to yourself. And this morning I was listening to a podcast interview to you, and then you were asked about your journey from being involved in business to being an author. Could you share that experience and how that transition happened?
Sure. So in college, I was a journalism co-major, and I enjoyed writing. Not always, but I actually took a few. There was a few seminal moments in my life that actually got me to love writing. I'm actually dyslexic, so it's always been very hard for me to read,
Mm.
which is weird that now I'm an author. But
Yeah.
I think there's part of this story wrapped up in there as well. Probably you have to psychoanalyze that one. But anyway, in college, I really enjoyed the process of explanatory journalism. You know, trying to educate myself through the process of writing. I think one of the beautiful things about writing is that if you write clearly, you think clearly. Whereas many times when people speak, they can bullshit all kinds of stuff.
Hmm.
But it's much harder to trick people through writing. You have to think clearly in order to write clearly. And
Yeah.
so I really like that process of writing in order to learn. I think it's an underutilized tool. So yeah, so I always enjoyed writing since college, and then I didn't go into being a reporter because I saw how much reporters get paid. That's crazy. I can't
Yeah.
raise a family on that, and so I decided to go into business. And my other co-major was econ, and so I got a job as a consultant, and I did that for a few years. Hated it, and decided to start my own company. So I started a solar energy business back when
Nice.
solar energy was just having a revival, just getting started. This
Yeah.
would have been 2003, so there were almost no people doing solar back then. And then, of course,
Mm.
it became a huge industry. We sold the first company that I started, and that's kind of how we got on our feet. Started. I say we. My wife and I started the company together, and we were bought out by a private equity firm. And then then I went to business school. Only applied to one school that if I got in, that I'd figure out how to sell the business, and that's what happened.
Mhm.
And so went to Stanford Graduate School of Business, and after Stanford started another business, and that business was not as successful. We raised a bunch of venture capital, but it didn't do as well. It wasn't a great exit. It was what we call an acqui-hire, where basically they bought the staff, the talent,
Mhm.
and it was bought by a company that then got bought by Yahoo. And then what the big benefit of that company, the second company that I started, was that I was at the intersection of gaming and advertising, and I had a front row seat to see the rise of companies like Facebook and Twitter and Instagram and WhatsApp. And I was really in the valley at the right place at the right time as these companies were really hitting their stride, and really got this this vantage point to see how they build these companies and these products to hook us. And
Mhm.
what I wanted to do was to steal their secrets. Frankly, I wanted to learn how to build a habit forming product myself. And who better to learn it from than my friends who worked at many of these companies? So I collected what I learned, and I started just documenting it, just putting it on my blog as here's what I'm learning. Like, look at these psychological tricks that these companies are using. Not necessarily in a bad way. I mean, I think a lot of people think that there's like something sinister going on. It's nothing sinister. I mean, these products are designed to be engaging because that's what we want. We want them to be
Yeah.
engaging. So what I want to do though is to ask, could we expand the use of this psychology to other sorts of products, right? Could we get people hooked to exercise, or hooked to education, or hooked to saving money, or hooked to all
Mhm.
kinds of healthy behaviors, healthy habits? And so that became what I wrote about on my blog. then I got asked by a former professor to teach a class with him on the stuff I was writing about. So I started teaching at the Stanford Graduate School of Business, where I became a lecturer in marketing. And then later I moved over to the Hasso Plattner Institute of Design at Stanford. Then I published my first book, Hooked, which was basically the class in book form, which was all
Mm.
about how to build habit-forming products. I started investing in companies using my model, and that's professionally what I do. Is I look for companies that use the hook model to build good habits in people's lives, and so I've invested in several unicorns so far that have used the hook model for good.
Hmm.
And then more recently, about the late 2019, I wrote my second book, Indistractable, which is about the other side of the coin. So if Hooked is about how to build good habits, then Indistractable is about how do we break the bad habits,
Hmm.
namely around distraction. So the subtitle is How to Control Your Attention and Choose Your Life.
Yeah, well, before actually getting into some parts of Indistractable, which I loved, I would like you to sort of mention. So, in Indistractable, you mentioned the process to like become indistractable, and we will get into that. But I'm interested, like, in knowing what is the process for Hooked, and can that model be applied to any business and any product?
No, so it's only good for products that form repeat engagement. So many products don't need repeat engagement. So, for example, if you buy car insurance, right, you don't use car insurance that frequently. You buy it, and hopefully you never have to use it. So that's not a product that would ever need to form a habit. But many other products, if they don't get people to change their behavior frequently, the company goes out of business, right? So when you think about learning a new language or saving money or exercising or eating right or taking your medication, all of these things require us to change consumer habits. And so the hook model, which is the basis of my first book, is about these 4 basic steps called the trigger, action, reward, and investment, that through successive cycles through these hooks, this is how our preferences are shaped, how our tastes are formed, and how these habits take hold. So it's not that every product needs to be habit forming. It's that if
Mhm.
your product needs to be habit forming, then you need a hook. So the first question is, does your business even need a habit? Many products don't need to become habit forming. But if your product does need a habit, you better make sure you have a hook built in.
Yeah, so I've got two main projects, the podcast and the Reader Lounge. The Reader Lounge, like the business part of it is helping authors with advertisement for their books. And you were in the advertising industry. Does like marketing and advertising need this hook model, or can it just be like one thing done once and that's it?
Well, what are you trying to get people to do? What's the behavior you want to change?
So what like with my brand, what I'm trying to do with authors is to create experiences around their books, yeah, their new published books, to engage with the community and make an impact. But that's like only one time with one book,
Mhm.
and if they publish more books, then more times.
Give me an
Yeah,
example.
that's
What would be a way that you would increase the impact of a book? What would be something you would do for the author or with the author?
so currently what I'm trying to do is like to create this experience as I told you, and it has like four main stages. Like the first one, which is just like an introduction, then the second one, which is like actual marketing, mostly content marketing, the third one, which is engagement, and that includes like a giveaway and some mastermind sessions, and the final part, which is like just a wrap up and a recap of what we did. And I think that
Mhm.
mostly for like the third part, for the masterminds and for the giveaways, maybe yes, for the authors, but also for my audience, I would like to build something that is actually um, sustainable and that can happen frequently, and
Mhm.
that something that people engage with usually.
Yeah. Yeah. So this is where a hook model can become very handy, because part of what I see a lot is people doing one-off campaigns
Mhm.
that after they're done, they go nowhere. So we put all this effort into building something and then people never use it again, which is really sad. Whereas if you build a habit around a product, now it becomes something that's used forever and ever, hopefully, right? If you're willing
Mhm.
to build a habit behind it. So it's really about following these 4 basic steps of a trigger, action, reward, investment. It's not easy to do, but it certainly can be done. But that's where we have to follow this model, right? Of first
Mhm.
asking ourselves, what's the trigger? Meaning what's the internal trigger, the emotion that we are satisfying for the user. Then the action, the simplest behavior done in anticipation of reward. What's the reward and how can it be made more fulfilling? And then finally, what's the investment, the bit of work the user does to improve the product with use. And it's only if you have that 4 steps that you'll form a habit. So, putting out content into the world isn't going to become a habit. It's missing some critical steps, right? It's missing, namely, the investment phase. What am I doing with the product that makes it better with use? Think about how Facebook, the more you use it, the smarter the algorithm gets. So it serves you better and better content. There's all kinds of forms of investment, data, uploading content, reputation, skill, all kinds of forms of investment that make the product better with use. So simply putting out content, like a book, is not a habit forming product. Like when I publish a book, I know that's not going to be a habit, right? Because you don't read a book again and again and again. You read it once and you're done with it. But that means, publishers have to crank out more and more and more and more books. They can't just stop and say, "Oh, we published one book and we're done." Unlike many other products that are habit forming, you build the platform once and people use it and use it and use it. So it has to follow this model. It has to be something that has all 4 steps of the hook model involved.
And just before getting into Indistractable, one more question that I have is like,
Sure.
in experience-based businesses. So for example, I've got this friend, he's called Emilio, and he's got a business called Live Beyond, and they create these experiences in different cities around the world, for people who work remotely, basically. And before and after the experience, before and after all the productivity tips they give them, before the traveling they do and everything, they ask them to answer some questions, and that way, like, they can actually help them to make this experience meaningful. And after the experience, they use the feedback that people give them, to actually improve the experience for the next time. Like, could that be applied for the hook model?
So that sounds like a great investment, right? That sounds like something that I'm doing to make the product better and better with use, like shaping preferences, putting something into the product to improve it the more I use it. That's great. That's the investment phase. Now we need to make sure they have the other 3 phases as well. Is there a clear trigger that's present? Is the action easy enough to do? One of the problems with physical products, unlike the products that we find on our phones, right? Our phones are right here. They're super easy to use. So if there's physical effort, so when I've seen many companies that have experiences for people where they have trouble becoming a habit, is that it's hard, right? I got to book it and coordinate and think through it. And do I want this experience or that experience? That's what tends to make those type of products not habits. If they're not successful, that's why. Too much friction. So you see, every business has its own challenge, right? Which is why you have to hit all 4. Because some products have an easy time doing the investment phase, but a really hard time doing the variable reward phase, or a hard time doing the action phase. The ones that nail it have all 4. So that's why it's so important to know what those 4 are and ask yourself, for your business, if you're building a habit forming product, if you want your product to be something that people use every single day and share with their friends and becomes the kind of successful product like these tech behemoths, got to have all 4 traits.
All right. Well, I guess that I will be reading Hooked soon, and
yeah, that'll be next.
Yeah, but now getting into Indistractable, I would like to start by defining what distractions are and what traction is, and so I would like you to share that idea.
Sure. That's a terrific place to start, because distraction is one of these words that we think we know, but when we dive deeper, many people don't really understand. I didn't understand it at first either. The best way to understand if you know something is ask yourself, do I know what the opposite of that thing is? So what's the antonym of distraction? Most people will tell you the opposite of distraction is focus, but that's not exactly right. The opposite of distraction is not focus. If you look at the origin of the word, the opposite of distraction is traction. That both words come from the same Latin root, trahare, which means to pull. And you'll notice that both traction and distraction end in the same 6 letters, A-C-T-I-O-N. That spells action, reminding us that distraction is not something that happens to us, but rather it is an action that we take. So traction, by definition, is any action that pulls you towards what you said you were going to do, things you do with intent, things that move you closer to your values and help you become the kind of person you want to become. Those are acts of traction. The opposite of traction is distraction. Distraction is any action that pulls you further away from what you plan to do, further away from your goals, further away from your values, and further away from becoming the kind of person you want to become. So this isn't just semantics. This is actually super important because I would argue any action can be traction or distraction based on one word, forethought. Okay. If you plan, whatever it is you plan to do is fine as long as it's consistent with what you said you were going to do. That's what becoming indistractable is all about. We all know that it's a terrible thing to be a liar. We'd never want to be called a liar. And yet we lie to ourselves all the time. We say we're going to work out. We don't. We say we're going to eat right. Not so much. We say we're going to spend quality time with our family and friends without getting distracted. Not so much. We say we're going to sit down at our desk and definitely work on that hard project. We're not going to procrastinate, but we delay 20, 30, 45 minutes later. We're still doing something else. So why do we lie to ourselves, right? The most important people in our life. So an indistractable person is as honest with themselves as they are with others. So the reason that this distinction between traction and distraction is so important is that anything can be traction or distraction based on whether we plan for it. So for example, I used to think that when I sat down at my desk, as long as I did work, then I was being productive, right? When what I didn't realize is, even though I would say to myself, okay, I've got that big important project I have to work on, that thing that I've been delaying, that big thing, that the hard work I know I have to do, I'd sit down at my desk and I'd say, okay, now I'm going to get started. No more distraction, no more procrastination. But first, let me check some email. Right? Let me just, Google something real quick. Let me just do those easy tasks on my to-do list as opposed to getting to work on the important and hard work that I have to do to move my life and career forward. So just because something's a work task doesn't mean it's not distraction. In fact, that's the most dangerous type of distraction, the distraction that you don't even realize is happening to you. Because we say, oh, it's work. It's okay. I'm checking email. That's a work-related task. No, that's the worst kind of distraction because you don't even realize you've been duped. So just because something is a work-related task doesn't mean it can't become a distraction. Many distractions are work-related tasks, but they're not what we plan to work on. And conversely, these days you hear about people saying, oh, that some behaviors are worse than others. Oh, if you're on Facebook or you play video games, that's bad, right? That's evil. Don't do that. It's rotting your brain. Ridiculous, stupid. Don't listen to those people. If you want to play video games, if you want to scroll Facebook, if you want to be on Instagram, do it. Great. There's nothing wrong with it. As long as you do it on your schedule and according to your values, not someone else's. Dorothy Parker said, the time you plan to waste is not wasted time. Don't feel guilty about enjoying Instagram. There's nothing wrong with it. It's a great tool, but don't use it on somebody else's schedule. Use it according to your schedule and your values.
Yeah, that was an idea that I love from the book. Like, yeah, time that is planned to be wasted isn't wasted time because you actually are creating traction, and that's what you plan to do. Yeah, so I would like to get into like, why do we get distracted and what does that have to do with pain?
Yeah. So we talked about traction and distraction. Now we have to talk about the triggers, the things that prompt us to get distracted, right? What comes before the distraction? So most people, when they think about distraction, they think about what we call the external triggers, the pings, the dings, the rings, all of the things in our outside environment that can lead us off track. They say, oh, I meant to do my homework. I meant to do this project, but my phone rang, or I got a notification, or something at my kid bothered me, or my boss bothered me. We blame the things outside of us. But turns out that is only 10% of the times that you get distracted. Are you distracted because of an external trigger? So what's the other 90%? 90% of the time, studies find that we get distracted. It's not because of an external trigger, but rather it's because of an internal trigger. What is an internal trigger? An internal trigger is an uncomfortable emotional state that we seek to escape. Boredom, loneliness, fatigue, uncertainty, stress, anxiety. This is 90% of the time studies find that we go off track. It's because we don't know how to deal with an uncomfortable sensation, which is why I say time management is pain management. Let me say that again. Time management is pain management. If you don't know what is that internal trigger that you are escaping from, you are always going to get distracted from something, my friend, whether it's too much food, too much booze, too much Facebook, too much football. It doesn't matter. You're going to find something to take you off track if you don't understand the pain you are looking to escape. So the first step to becoming indistractable is mastering those internal triggers before they become your master.
Yeah, actually, before getting into how to actually master those internal triggers, one thing that I want to mention and that I think can be related to this is that, like, in Matthew McConaughey's book, in Green Lights, he talks about this idea of like not staying in the surface of things and going deep, not just being superficial, but actually
Mhm.
like going granular and understanding stuff. And I think that is, well, that has to do with this. Like, we actually gotta understand what is that triggers our distractions to actually like deal with it in the right way and solve it. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, and well, so in the, I think that's part two of the book. You actually talk about how to master internal triggers, and you talked about this idea of creating play and also like acceptance while you maybe get distracted or while you do something. I would like you to dive into those, but specifically also like into the part of play, because that's
Yeah.
something like interesting.
Yeah, totally. So there's the book is full of research, right? It's not
Hmm.
hey, this is my technique that works for me. It's going to work for everyone because I say so. It's backed by peer-reviewed studies. You see in the book, there's 30 pages of
Hmm.
citations to peer-reviewed studies. I'm really big on the science. So one of the interesting bits of research I found was how we can bring play to a situation to help us deal with the discomfort of having to do a task. We hear a lot in self-help books, oh, get into flow or make a habit out of something. No, it doesn't always work. And I'll tell you why it doesn't work. Flow, this concept of flow, it's great if you enjoy the task, right? Then
Hmm.
flow is easy. We dog the Csikszentmihalyi follows around surfers. Of course, surfers can get into flow. Surfing's fun. How do I get into flow when I have to write, a homework assignment that I don't feel like doing? That sucks. You can't get into flow when you're doing something like that. Oh,
Hmm.
or let's make it into a habit. You hear people say, "Oh, turn everything into a habit." And I write about habits. I've been researching habits for years, and I'm telling you, we have been misleading people around habits. People think that they can turn anything into a habit, and that's just not true. That there's only some behaviors that can be turned into habits. The definition of a habit is a behavior done with little or no conscious thought. So if you're trying to lose weight, losing weight is hard.
Hmm.
Okay. Exercising and dieting sucks. It is not easy. It's not going to be something you turn into a habit. Writing a book. Listen, I've written 2 bestsellers and I've written thousands of articles. I've been published in the New York Times, Harvard Business Review. Writing is hard. It is not a habit. Don't try and make it a habit. Why? Because when people think that they're trying to make it something to a habit, it's shorthand for I want to have done it. That's what it means. Whenever you hear somebody say, "Oh, I want to turn that into a habit," or just make that into a habit, it's basically what they're saying is that hard behavior that I don't want to do. I wish it was done already. But that's not how you do hard things. Hard things don't get done because you want them to be easy. Hard things
Hmm.
get done because you're willing to power through and deal with the discomfort. So we need a different technique. And the reason this is so toxic, by the way, is that when people think, "Oh, I can turn anything to a habit," and then they see 30 days later, 2 months later, 3 months later, "Hey, this still sucks. I hate this." They think that they're broken.
Hmm.
They think that they did something wrong. And they didn't do anything wrong. There's nothing wrong with them. It's a stupid technique that people have been misled to think that everything can be a habit, everything can be flow. No, it can't.
Yeah,
Because
sure.
deliberate practice, this whole idea around the 10,000 hour rule, is the opposite of a habit. A habit is a behavior done with little or no conscious thought. Deliberate practice requires us to focus intensely on a task so we can learn from our mistakes. They are exact opposites. So if we want to get better at something, we have to not try and escape it with flow or habit. We have to lean into the discomfort and learn how to deal with it. And one of the strategies that can help us deal with those internal triggers and master them so they don't master us is play. That play, turns out the research finds, to my surprise, doesn't have to be fun. It doesn't even have to be enjoyable, right? I didn't know that, but play
Yeah,
doesn't
me
have to be
neither.
enjoyable. Right. And it's a pretty amazing concept. You hear many times that the way to make something into play is to put a spoonful of sugar on it, right? The Mary Poppins method. Just have a
Hmm.
reward, have a some kind of treat at the end, and then you'll want to do it. Well, yes and no. It works sometimes for things you have to do just once. But if it's a repeat task, especially one that requires creativity, That does not work. In fact, it backfires. We know that when we reward people with what we call extrinsic rewards, the spoonful of sugar technique, they rush through it. They don't do a very good job because they just want to do the minimum amount of
Mm-hmm.
effort to get the reward. So it's not always a good idea to use the spoonful of sugar technique. Instead, what we want to do is to find ways not to depart the experience, not to try and escape it, but to dive into it more intensely. And so some of these tactics include learning more about the task, focusing on the nuances of the task, and making what we call a sandbox. You know, if you think about it, a bunch of dirt is not fun. But somehow, if you put dirt in a box, okay, and you give a few toys to interact with the dirt in fun ways, kids go crazy. They love it, right? It's a park, right? Like now it's a
Mm-hmm.
sandbox. It's fun because it has constraints. So we can take all sorts of experiences, the ones that we don't find very fun, by adding constraints and looking for variability. Those are the two secrets of play. Add constraints and look for variability. If you can do that, you can make all sorts of experiences that would otherwise be drudgery into play. And again, the purpose of play is not to make it so fun, right? Like a
Yeah.
lot of tasks are not going to be fun, accept that fact. But by using play, we can use that power to focus our attention long enough to make sure we don't get distracted. That's the point.
Yeah, and I mean, it's initially, I would say, counterintuitive, like to think of playing not as fun, because I mean, since a young age,
Yeah.
we are
It can
taught
be
that.
fun. It just doesn't have to be
Mhm.
fun.
Yeah, yeah, that's an important point. Um, and well, so what about like deep work and actually like focusing a lot on something? You also mentioned like building constraints about around what you're doing. How would you do that, like when writing a book or when
Yeah.
like doing a task that requires like a lot of focus and that
Mhm.
might be even, yeah, boring,
Yeah.
like on the
Yeah.
surface.
So by adding constraints, for example, an example that I use all the time is instead of putting on your to-do list, by the way, to-do lists are one of the worst
Hmm.
things you can do for your personal productivity. It's a terrible technique, partially because there's no constraints, right? A to-do list, you can add more and more and more and more things to a to-do list. I've never met anybody in my life who finishes everything on their to-do list. It doesn't exist. But we keep using this stupid technique that day after day is broken. It doesn't work, but we keep doing it because and it actually has some very harmful consequences. You can see, by the way, there's a pattern here. The book is full of me telling you why 90% of what we think is true is bullshit because the science doesn't support a lot of these
Hmm.
mainstream techniques that we get, we hear some guru say and we think, oh, this is the truth, when actually
Hmm.
the science says otherwise. So I'm trying to wake people up here and empower them to see that not all these techniques that you've been taught are any good. So one of the worst techniques is running your life on a to-do list. And by the way, to be very clear, I'm all for getting things out of your head. That's a great idea. Getting things out of your head and writing them down, awesome idea. But but planning your life on a to-do list, meaning if you wake up in the morning and you look at your to-do list before you figure out what's on your calendar, you made a big mistake. If you write things down but you don't put them in your schedule, you're screwed.
Hmm.
You already messed up. Because what happens is over time, when we come home and day after day, week after week, month after month, year after year, we look at this list of things we did not finish. It sends a message to our psyche that we can't do it. See, right? Like you came home, look at all this stuff you still didn't do,
Hmm.
loser. And we start believing. This is why you hear people saying things like, "Oh, I have a short attention span," or "I have I'm no good at time management," or all kinds of cockamamie excuses that people make up because they have taught themselves over the years that they're no good because this to-do list method has told them they are incapable of finishing what they say they're going to do.
Yeah.
So
Do you
rather
think
than
do you think that has to do also with people saying that they are always busy?
always busy, tell me more. What do you mean?
Yeah, so I mean, many of my friends, many of my teachers, many people I know
Mhm.
say they are always busy or that they do not have time to do something, but they do not like base what they do on a schedule. They base what they
Mm,
do on a to-do list. Do you think
yeah.
that it? Mm,
Well, being busy shouldn't be an excuse, but reprioritizing should be a reason, right? There's nothing wrong with saying, you know what, that's just not a priority for me right now. You could probably find a nicer way of saying it, but that's probably what they're saying. They're saying, "Oh, I'm so sorry, I'm busy." Well, no, because you're also watching Netflix at night too. So how busy
Yeah.
are you really? It's just that it's not a priority, which is fine, which is fine.
Mhm.
We can't do everything. We have to prioritize. We have to decide for ourselves how we can live our life according to our values, which means we have to make trade-offs.
Yeah, I actually wanted you to get into like this idea of value. So you actually mentioned how to like live your values and create traction towards them. But have you got any suggestions or any also book recommendations like to help define values and help
Yeah.
define like north stars?
Yeah, let's dive right in. So the best way to understand how to make sure you live your values is to first understand what values are. So let's define what
Hmm.
values are. Values are attributes of the person you want to become. That's what values are, attributes of the person you want to become. So what you need to do is to sit down and ask yourself, how would the person I want to become spend their time according to these three life domains? And the three life domains I talk about in the book are you're at the center of these three life domains, then your relationships, and then your work. So, what I want you to do is to take out your calendar in the week ahead and ask yourself, how much time would the person I want to become spend on taking care of themselves, the you domain? You're the most important person in your world. So, how much time would the person you want to become spend on whatever you think is important? So, if you value your physical health, okay, do you have time in your schedule for exercise? Do you have a bedtime? We all know how important sleep is. How many of us have a
Hmm.
bedtime? Right? It's super important. Is it in your calendar? If you, by the way, I'm not saying it needs to be important. If it doesn't matter to you, I don't care. It's up to you,
Hmm.
right? Nobody can tell you what your values are, but don't say one thing and do something else. Turn your
Yeah.
values into time. If you say that reading, I'm sure, many of your fans, they say, oh, reading is so important. But do you have time in your calendar when you're going to spend time reading? Right? It's very easy. You can crank through all kinds of amazing books. And, you and I both agree about this, that, one of the
Hmm.
best ways you can spend your money is on books,
Yeah,
because
for
you're
sure.
paying for years of research for $10, $20. It's probably the best investment you could ever make.
It is.
But do you have that time in your schedule, or do you just say, oh yeah, I'm a person who values knowledge? Well, but is it on your calendar? So then comes relationships, right? How many of us make time for friends? Whenever, as opposed to saying, no, these are important relationships in my life, whether it's my friends, my kids, my parents, my siblings. Have time in your calendar, especially now that many of us are isolated socially. At least make time on your calendar to have, Zoom calls or something with the
Hmm.
people who are important to you in your life. Put that time in your schedule. And then finally, when it comes to work, there are two kinds of work. We have what we call reactive work and reflective work. Most people spend most of their time doing reactive work. Reactive work is reacting to emails, reacting to notifications,
Hmm.
reacting to all kinds of stuff happening outside them. And there's almost a kind of a habit that people get into in not having to think, right? Remember, a habit is a behavior done with little or no conscious thought. Many people become so reactive that all day long they just wait and are almost comforted by their email telling them what to do, their messages telling them what to do, the boss telling them what to do, and they don't think to themselves, "Wait a minute, what do I need to do? What is important to me
Hmm.
to move my career forward?" So you can't spend your entire day doing reactive work. Don't get comfortable in that habit. Spend some time, at least some time in your day, doing reflective work. Reflective work is the kind of work that can only get done without distraction. Being creative, strategizing, planning, thinking, for God's sakes, requires you to work without distraction. So that time has to be planned and protected.
Yeah, well, while reading your book, so previously, before reading your book, I read Essentialism, and while reading your book, I was able like to relate many concepts. And one of them was this idea of like dedicating time to reflect on what is important, and then also like yeah, time to actually do. And then there's this idea of reactive work, which I hadn't heard, but yeah, it does make sense. And then one thing that I wanted like to ask, because it's like a little conflict in my head. So when scheduling, there are people, as Mark Zuckerberg, who tell that you should do the easiest task first, because you have more energy and whatever, and you can like move on faster. But then we've got ideas, the one in that frog, which tell you that like you should start with the hardest task. how do you suggest that people like actually schedule their day? Depend should they do that depending on their energy levels or on on what?
Yes.
Yeah, on
The
energy
answer is
levels.
it doesn't matter.
Oh.
It doesn't matter. As long as you do what you say you're going to do.
Mhm.
It doesn't matter if you do the hardest thing first, the hardest thing last, if you watch video games or play video games, if you watch television, if you pray, meditate, paint, look at the ceiling, it doesn't matter. You can change that, but not in the moment. Okay. Whatever it is you say you're going to do that. Whatever it is you say you're going to do. If you want to play video games, you say, I'm going to play video games for an hour. Do it. Enjoy it without guilt. It doesn't matter what you do as long as it's done with intent. So anything you plan to do is traction. Everything
Mhm.
else is distraction. So what people should do is to play around with this, right? So on Monday, do the hardest task first. See how that works out. On Tuesday, do the easiest task first. See how that works out. And then learn over time. This is another reason why to-do lists are awful, because
Mhm.
to-do lists have no feedback mechanism. This is why what we have is it's called the planning fallacy. That Daniel Kahneman did these studies that found that people on average take 3 times longer to finish a task than they think they will, because traditionally when we think about a task and how long it takes to finish, there's no feedback. We don't learn how long things take us to do. The only way to learn is to make a prediction, right? Like a scientist. A scientist makes a hypothesis, runs an experiment, and then looks at the results and then runs another experiment, right? That's what
Mhm.
we have to do with our schedules. So when you make a schedule for the day, don't touch it, right? Once it's set, you follow it. But for the next day, you can do whatever you want. So at that night, the night before, set your schedule, set what you want to do for the day, and then execute that. And then stop and take stock of how it worked out. Right. So for me, I do this once a week. I set my schedule for an entire week. So every Sunday night, I
Mhm.
sit down takes me 10 minutes maximum. And I look at the week ahead and I say, oh, okay, you know what? I have that meeting here and that cuts into my usual writing time. So let me move that writing time a little bit because I want to make sure I do that. But it doesn't look like I have enough time for this other project. So that's okay. I want to move that over here and I want to make sure I have time for my daughter. And exercise is very important to me. So I have to have that on my schedule. So I make my schedule for the week ahead. And once it's set, it's set. I don't touch it. Definitely not in the day of. You don't make changes in the day of. But many times I'll, at the end of the day, say, oh, you know what? I need some more time. I didn't get enough time to do X, Y,
Mhm.
Z. Let me make small adjustments. Or, recently I used to write first thing in the morning. Recently I changed it. Now I'm experimenting with writing in the afternoons. It doesn't matter. The best schedule is the one you follow.
The best schedule is the one you follow. Yeah. And well, so last week, actually last Sunday, I was planning my week. I was trying to actually implement Indistractable, and I did. And on Monday, I went through my day as I planned to do. But then on Tuesday, one person who is very close to me was diagnosed with COVID, so I had to
Mhm.
go in on Tuesday to get the test and see if I was positive or negative. And well, I'm negative. But the point is that like life came up, and yeah, I wasn't able like on Tuesday to actually follow my schedule as I planned. What should we do in those cases?
Yeah. So if it's something that is truly not predictable, and I would put this in the 1% of distractions that is truly not predictable. You can't
Hmm.
predict if somebody close to you got COVID. So that's the kind of scenario where, yeah, you do what you need to do. It's a true emergency that you could not have predicted. You take care of it. At the end of the day, you take stock and you make adjustments for the rest of your week. So everything doesn't get derailed. You make adjustments for the days that you have in the remaining in the week.
Hmm.
That's about 1% of distractions, maybe even less, right? The kind of stuff that I typically hear is not, oh, my friend got COVID. It's, I was stuck in traffic. Traffic's pretty predictable, right? You have traffic every single day, right?
Hmm.
What if your hero said, hey, I need to meet you for breakfast. Do you want to meet, Michael Jordan or Oprah or I don't know, somebody super famous says, hey, you want to get together with me for breakfast? It's at 9 a.m. at this restaurant, and you know that there's going to be traffic on the way there. So what do? That's not a surprise.
Hmm.
Traffic could take you 15 minutes. It could take you an hour. So what do? You build in buffer time, right?
Yeah,
You can
buffer.
predict
Hmm.
the unpredictable, right? You don't know how long it's going to take, but you build in buffer time. So what we find is the vast majority of distractions are actually things that occur again and again and again that we can plan for. Now, so once in a while, there's distractions that, oh my God, just came out of nowhere. Lightning strikes, it happens. But we don't want to make sure, we don't want to think that these exceptions are the rule. They are not. Do not fall in this trap that we call whataboutism. Whataboutism is when people say, okay, yeah, I know you spent 5 years of researching this. I know that this is going to work, but what about COVID? So I'm going to throw away the book. No, don't
Yeah.
make the one exception out of a million a reason to not use this methodology.
Yeah, well, thanks for the clarification, and I will try to restructure the rest of the week later today. And well, I want now to get into like external triggers, and
Mm-hmm.
I think that through the part of the book in which you talk about external triggers, you talk mostly about like technology, and two things that I loved were leaving empty your desktop, and that's actually something that I did, and also
Nice.
like yeah, and then like making your phone in something indistractable.
Yes.
um I would like you to explain some of these ideas so that also people listening can
I
maybe
would love
apply
for
them.
you to explain the ideas. I want to hear what was
Oh,
most helpful to you because you
all
actually put this
right.
into practice.
Yeah, well, so with the desktop, I before like reading this part of the book, I had like my desktop was full of images and videos and recordings, and
Yeah.
it was full of many things. um but then like that also made me be like more confused when I opened my computer and when I wanted to do something. But then what I did was that I like reorganized all that information, all those images and all those recordings into smaller folders, and then I sent those into another file which is not in my desktop. So basically my desktop is now free and I have
Nice.
no distractions there. And I added another background for my desktop, which has like less distractions. It's just like the earth and space, and that's it, like basically
Excellent.
black.
Excellent.
And with my phone, the thing is that like you suggest, I think it was a process of 4 hours, right? And it was something like I don't really remember like the words, but it was like identifying on the apps, and then removing some, and then
Mm-hmm.
like reorganizing. And what I did was that I did delete some of the apps I had, but not all of them. And what
Mm-hmm.
I did was that, so in Apple, in the iPhone, there's this option like to not show an app in the main screen. So what I did was to make that function available. I used that function, and so my phone is so you can basically see here that I've got only this and
Yeah.
this.
There we go.
Yes, that's
Beautiful.
it. But then if I want like to use another app, I have to do this, and then look for that app. And those were like the
Excellent.
main things that I have been applying with external
Excellent.
triggers.
Yeah, that's
But
great.
yeah, with
So external triggers, by the way, we got to put this into perspective that the external triggers are, again, they're about 10% of the distractions, but they're easy to fix, right? So turns out two-thirds
mhm,
of people with a smartphone, two-thirds never change their notification settings. I mean, come on. How can we
yeah,
say that technology
uh,
is addicting us when we haven't taken 5 minutes just to turn off the
yes,
notification settings? So those are some very simple things you can do. It's not the you can't do that in isolation. Many people think, oh, I'm going to turn off the notifications, therefore I won't get distracted. But then they realize that 90% of distraction starts from within those internal
mhm,
triggers. But after you've mastered the internal triggers, after you've made time for tractions, then we want to go ahead and take care of those external triggers. And it's something you can do once, you knock it out, just like you did, clear your desktop, turn your phone into an indistractable phone. Probably didn't take you more than what, 45 minutes, maybe an hour to
no,
do it. And
like
now you're
30 minutes.
30 minutes. Fantastic. And
Yeah.
that's it. Like now your phone is not going to be a source of distraction
Mhm.
because, it's amazing. People will like, read the instruction manual for how to use their blender. And they use that maybe like once a month, but they don't take the time to really configure their phone in a way that actually serves them as opposed to us serving the phones.
Yeah, that was something very interesting in the book. Like, again, I don't remember the exact quote, but it was something like, um, the like if you gotta serve a trigger, then it's something
Mhm.
like leading you to distraction, and if a
Right.
trigger serves you, then it's something leading you to attraction.
That's right.
That was, yeah, something that I loved. And
Yeah,
now I
and
would
because look, these devices aren't bad. If the device is
mhm,
helping you do what you say you want to do, it's wonderful, right? The technology is great. So we have to be careful of, oh, technology is melting our brains, technology is evil. It's not the technology. It's how we use it. It's just a tool like any other. So exactly, it's if it's leading you towards traction, if it's leading to what you said you were going to do, it's serving you. If it's leading you towards distraction, then you are serving it.
and well, like with my generation, with Gen Z, we are told many times that we are so distracted and everything because of technology. And I would like you like to explain that idea in your perspective, and
Mhm.
also like share why is it important for us, like for the new generation, to become indistractable for the future.
Yeah, so I'm pretty optimistic. The press likes to tell the same
Hmm.
story again, 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 why your generation is screwed. And I think it's ridiculous. I think Gen Z, I'm telling you, I mean, I used to teach at Stanford for many years, and I think the generations keep getting better and better. And I think especially your generation is incredibly empathetic, incredibly connected, incredibly smart. Like this is the smartest generation in history, right? I'm super optimistic. I got to tell you, when I'm asked to come into companies and help employees become indistractable, it's not the younger employees that are so-called addicted to technology and they're always on the TikTok and the Facebook and all that stuff. No, you know who has the problem? It's the older people, right? It's the older people who haven't learned manners around how to use technology, right? I mean,
Hmm.
among younger people, I know what they say to each other, right? Like you go out with your friends and you're like, hey, how was that date? And you're like, oh, that girl, she wouldn't stop checking her device. Oh, what a loser, right? Like we know, younger people know that looking at your phone when you're meant to be on a date or meant to, go out to lunch with your friends is rude. It's
Hmm.
old people who haven't learned this, right? It's boomers who haven't learned that that's rude, and that's who does it. And so we need to play our part in educating people like, look, this is unacceptable behavior, that there's a place and a time to use technology. Now, where I think the older generation, what they don't understand is that many times when kids use their phones in front of you, it's because they don't want to talk to you.
Yeah.
That's why they're doing
Yes.
it. It's not the phone. It's, well, around their friends, they don't use their phone. It's around you. So there's a whole section in the book on how to raise indistractable kids. And I think we need to go past these surface level blame and shame analysis, medicalize and moralize, and actually get to the root cause of the problem.
Yes, because actually, like blaming and all that leads to more use of the phone, and it's just like a downward cycle.
Right.
And well, like this has been like what I wanted to talk about, like Indistractable mainly, and we talked about many more things. Um, Now, like before getting into some of my last questions, before
Mhm.
letting you go, would you like to add anything to this part of Indistractable?
No, go for it. Yeah. Curious what else you have.
All right, cool. So my podcast is called The Transformation Journey, and my yeah, one of my last questions always is like, how do you define transformation and how do you approach it? And in your case, I would like you like to answer it in how you do it in your personal life, but how you are
Mhm.
doing it with these tools that you are yeah, sharing to the world. In this
Yeah.
case, with Indistractable.
Yeah. So how do I define transformation?
Hmm.
Hmm. So I think uh, change is the only constant, as we say, that we have to anticipate change. And the way we change is by transforming ourselves. That humans have two amazing qualities, that whenever we have change, we adapt and we adopt, meaning we adapt to these new behaviors or these new changes in one way or the other. I mean, that's what makes our species so successful, right? There's no other
Hmm.
species on the face of the earth that can survive anywhere on the face of the earth. We can live in the North Pole, we can live in the desert, we can live in space because we are eminently
Yes.
adaptable. That is one of our most important defining traits as a species. And then we adopt. What do we adopt? We adopt new technologies to fix the bad aspects of the last generation of technology. So Paul Virilio, the philosopher, said, when you invent the ship, you invent the shipwreck. So every new technology, every transformation, every change has negative consequences along with the good consequences. So
Yeah.
smart people, optimists, the people who build the future, they don't say, oh, this is terrible, this is evil, the sky is falling, everything's horrible. That's what the news media wants you to believe. That's what losers want you to believe. Smart people say, hey, what can I do to fix the problems? That's where the opportunity lies. Right? It's a big reason why I didn't become a journalist. Journalists just tell you about
Yeah.
all the crappy stuff. You never hear the good news because they know that sells, that sells attention, is to tell you all the bad stuff. But the people who make the future see the problems as opportunities. And
Yeah.
they create this transformation by creating technology that we adopt to fix the last generation of technology.
Yeah, I love that. So I have been asking this question to many people, and I had heard about like the idea of, yeah, adapting, but not about the idea of adopting and, yeah, like innovating with stuff that we are living. And so, Nir, is there anything else you would like to add in general to the topic of hooked or to the indistractable or transformation or whatever?
I appreciate it. Thank you. So if you want to learn more about my work, you please visit my blog at nirandfar.com. Nir is spelled like my first name. It's Nir and far.com. So nirandfar.com. There's actually an 80-page workbook there that's complimentary, totally free. We couldn't fit it in the edition of the book, but you can use it there. It's a great guide to help you become indistractable, whether you buy the book or not, doesn't matter. You can get that at nirandfar.com. And my first book, again, is titled Hooked, How to Build Habit-Forming Products. And that's for people building good habits. And Indistractable, How to Control Your Attention and Choose Your Life, is about breaking these bad habits, primarily the habit of distraction.
Well, Nir, so thank you so much for coming again. And well, I will be trying to apply many of the things that we talked about.